Hi guys, this is Melinda Corey from SEI 529. I am here to give a presentation on a topic that I chose around language and literacy, and my topic is environments that support language development for English language learners. Hopefully you have the link to the Google presentation that I have created so that you can follow along as I'm talking. I chose this topic because English language learners, or ELLs, as I will probably refer to them mostly during the presentation, are something that is near and dear to my heart. My undergraduate degree is in Spanish, and I have spent some time teaching with ELLs in another state. And here in Central Maine, there's less diversity of language, certainly more diversity in other ways, but less diversity of language. And so I haven't had as many experiences with that since moving back here to Maine, but it's something that's still really interesting to me. And I feel like as Maine is becoming more and more diverse, it's something that's going to become more and more of a relevant need for early childhood educators to consider. So that said, if you look at the first picture in the presentation, this mother with her little girl, I want you to imagine that these are recent immigrants who've settled in Central Maine and speak very little English, and put yourself in this mother's shoes for a minute and imagine what it might be like for her to find a placement, a program, a school for her young child, what it might be like for her to go through the registration process. And I want you to imagine, if you were her, what would you want a teacher to know about you and your family? And how you could communicate those things. I think one of the most valuable things we can do as educators is to put ourselves in another person's shoes, to be able to take perspective in that way. There are so many hurdles for English language learners in a lot of different ways, and particularly if they are not speakers of a really common second language. For example, sometimes if you speak Spanish or French, it's much easier to find resources and translators and the help that you need than it is if you speak a less common language, at least a less common language for me. The next slide, the children playing outside, I looked at this picture and was imagining being an English language learner from another culture on the first day in a new pre-K classroom, and just looking at these kids and thinking about what would I be feeling if I was that kid who, you know, everybody else in the classroom speaks English and probably has pretty similar home experiences. And I wanted you guys to think about, as you look at this picture, what do you wish your teacher knew about you if you're that child, that, you know, 4-year-old little one just starting pre-K for the first time and not really understanding what your peers are saying or what the teacher is saying or what a lot of the classroom materials mean. I really think taking that perspective on English language learners is what's going to drive and motivate us to be excellent educators for them and to give them the best environment that we possibly can. So if we move on to the next slide, there are some information about English language learners in the United States. The fact is that most people in the world learn to speak at least 2, if not more, languages. The United States is somewhat unusual in that we do not encourage all children to learn 2 languages. I think it would be really amazing if kids in the States were learning another language from very young ages, because it's an incredibly useful skill and there's really no downside. Statistics show that, you know, 1 in 5 children today have at least one foreign-born parent, and children of immigrants are the fastest growing portion of the United States population. And I'm sure as educators who have taken lots of classes at this point, you're familiar with the statistics around English language learners and The fact that, you know, the United States is rapidly becoming more diverse, and English-speaking Caucasians are not necessarily going to be a majority for very much longer when you look at the course of time. So having a proper understanding of culture and other languages is going to become more and more critical. Unfortunately, in the United States, many children from an English language learner background also come from low-income backgrounds for a variety of reasons, and this, as we know, puts them at risk for lower educational achievement. Not always, but in many cases, and a lot of research backs that up. So it's really important for us to remember the hurdles that these kiddos are up against, and to be doing all we can to mitigate that for them while they're really little, and we can make the biggest impact. The things that I learned about and I've had experience with helping with this kind of negative impact is being respectful, first and foremost, of whatever the culture is. There, in some circles in the United States, is certainly a sort of prevalent attitude of if people are going to live here, they should speak English. And whatever your personal or political beliefs are, the fact is these children come to us not necessarily speaking a lot of English, and we need to accept them where they are while still finding ways to help them succeed. And they will need to learn English to succeed in school. That's a fact, but it doesn't mean that they have to lose their first language, or that they need implied to them that their first language or culture is somehow inferior or less than English or American culture. The kinds of things that are going to motivate these children, we see the best results in children who are sort of naturally social. It's, of course, logically more difficult for children who are shy or reserved to seek out communication opportunities. And so it's important to watch for those kiddos and make sure you focus on drawing out kids that are more reserved in ways that are comfortable for them, but to kind of help them seek out those opportunities to interact with peers and with adults so that they can practice their language and their communication. And again, I just think the key thing is the teacher showing that they want to understand and respect that culture and language. It's going to go a long way with the kids, and it's going to go a really long way with the parents if they feel like you respect them. Sometimes parents of English language learners are really uncomfortable with school and feel like, that they can't help their own children because they don't speak English, and that's just absolutely not the case. There are so many things that all parents can do to help their children, and there are a lot of ways that teachers, educators, home visitors, everyone in early education can work together with parents to help these kiddos be successful. So I have lots of strategies in my presentation. I don't want to read them all off. You guys can read, but there are some neat ideas here. There's a lot of great information out there about what works for helping children from another language learn English in an early childhood setting. And kind of basing it all on those things we've already talked about, that respect, that perspective taking, and putting yourself in their shoes. A really nice thing is if the teacher or another classroom staff member is able to visit the family at home, if the family is open to that, to really see what is this child's home like. What are the activities and the foods and the cultural things that are going to help this child feel safe and comfortable and connected, and also what are those things that they can share with their peers about their culture and feel like they have a place in the classroom, and that they know things that they can share with others. So this strategy, the second strategy on slide 8, using open-ended rather than yes-no questions, this is really key for language development for any young learner. This is one of the first strategies that we give parents as Part C home visitors for any young child with a communication delay is, use less yes and no questions, more open-ended. What do you want to drink rather than do you want milk? Because it's very easy to, shake your head or nod your head and not have to communicate at all. And using those open-ended questions, they could say milk, they could say juice, they could point to show you what they want to drink, but at least they're having to do something active and engaged to communicate a specific want or need. And the other tip on this page is really key, to not pair all of the English language learner children together or put them into groups. It's really important for them to be integrated with English-speaking peers as much as possible for the most successful learning, similar to least restrictive environment for children with special needs. We do everything we can to avoid grouping all the children with various special needs together. We want them integrated fully into classrooms with typical peers, and that's what we want for English language learners too. So that's a good parallel to draw. This next slide, slide 9, are just some more ways to include families of English language learners. Particularly important is considering what kind of communication is most helpful to them. For example, if they don't speak a lot of English, they probably can't read a ton of English, so sending letters home may not be really effective for them. It can be really nice to have those families participate in your classroom in some way. The kids love this kind of stuff, having people from different cultures come in to talk about the foods of their cultures and maybe even cook something and share it, or to sing a song from their culture at circle time. Those things are really simple, but they are great learning opportunities for everyone, and they help the English language learners to feel like they're an important part of the classroom and that their differences are recognized and celebrated rather than setting them apart in a negative way. So looking at this next slide, I wanted to bring up the idea of what is this teacher doing in her classroom to support English language learners and children from other cultures. And it's odd asking a question when there's no one actually here to respond to me, but I'll just kind of give you a minute to look at the pictures and think about what she's doing that could be helpful to ELLs in her classroom. So one of the first things I noticed right off the bat is that this teacher is having a small group circle, and she is using a globe to show her students a different country. And I think a globe can be kind of an abstract idea for children this young, but I love the concept of that, there's this whole big world out there, and we're, all from different places. We've all visited different places. We have relatives in different places. It really opens up the world for children who may not have had a lot of world experiences or life experiences, and it gives everyone a chance to sort of say, oh, I've been here and I've been there and I'm from here, and to share what they know about those different places that they're finding on the globe. The nice thing I see in the classroom setup is the way that there are a lot of things labeled in 2 languages and with pictures. This is one really key thing is for very young English language learners who can't really read in their own language, much less in English. It's going to be really helpful to have a lot of pictures matching up to whatever you're doing in the classroom. So not just on an alphabet board, but another way you can do that is on the toy shelves. Have the name of the toy in English, the name of the toy in Spanish, and a photograph or Mayor Johnson board maker picture of whatever the toy is. Something to provide that extra little visual. It's also important to remember when using pictures that if the child is from a culture that's dramatically different than the United States, the picture may not necessarily be representative for them, and it's just something to keep in mind. For example, a house picture for a child who maybe has moved here from a very poverty-stricken area of the world, a house to them is going to look very different than what a house to a lot of middle-class American children is going to look like. So it's not that you have to have an exact picture that matches what every culture would have, but it's just something to keep in mind and to be aware of for those kiddos. I think it's pretty basic at this point that classrooms, we know from doing the Eckers kinds of environmental assessments and from best practice that it's really important to include culturally sensitive diversity materials in classrooms for young children. And it's important that these be non-stereotypical. So that means, if you have children from Mexico in your classroom, don't just throw a sombrero in dramatic play and say that you're including cultural diversity. It's really important to include things that are truly representative of that culture, and that's where the families can be really helpful, to say, what could we include here that would help your daughter or son feel more at home. I also love this idea. This was something I hadn't really thought of until I started doing some reading for this presentation, was having a quiet space in the classroom where an English language learner can just go to take a break. I imagine a lot of us have probably traveled to other countries where we do not necessarily speak the language of those countries, and if you have, you know that it can be very overwhelming, and sometimes you just want all the noise that you don't understand to stop for a few minutes. And so consider if the quiet space in your classroom or the place where kids can go to take breaks is welcoming as a place where an English language learner can go if they just need a minute to sort of clear their heads and calm down from the overstimulation of just constantly hearing all this noise that they don't necessarily understand. I'm a big children's lit fan, and the next slide is some pictures of various children's books, fairly well-known ones, that are bilingual. I love bilingual books, and there are so many options for bilingual books. I would encourage everyone to click over to Amazon.com. Pick one children's book that you love and just look it up to see if it comes in other languages. If it's a fairly well-known children's book, it probably comes in many languages, and I particularly like bilingual books because the child can see it in their native language and compare it to the English, and it gives them a really nice comparison. And it's also great to expose the English-speaking children in the classroom to the way other languages look. And it's something that the peers can share together in the reading area. Let me just click down. I'm on slide 13 now for you that are following along. Some of the other ideas around setting the environment up for success, using real-life items in the classroom. This was really interesting to me, and this is part of taking that perspective that I hadn't thought of. One author that I did some research on had said to try to use real-life items in the classroom, like in the dramatic play area whenever possible, so that English language learners have less confusion. For example, having an old cell phone, somebody upgrades their plan, they let you have their old cell phone for your dress-up area. That's going to be a much more effective play tool for an English language learner than a big clunky plastic fake phone that doesn't really look like something they have real life experience with. It's also really important to have structure and routine. We know that that works for English speaking children really well. They really respond as a whole to routines and classrooms having some structure and things happening at the same time as much as possible within reason. If we are able to do that, English language learners will start to know the routines and activities, and they'll be able to depend on what's happening even if they don't understand all of the language. For example, if they, after a few days, notice, even though I don't really understand that the teacher is saying, clean up your lunch dishes, it's time for nap, they can see that every day after children eat, they're going and getting ready to get on their cots for a rest. And so even if they don't understand all the language, they can use those kinds of visual classroom cues to support their learning. And that's going to help them to feel like, you know, they fit in better, and that they can understand things and be successfully participating in routines even if they don't know all the right words. Something that can be really helpful with that kind of routine thing, as we all know, are visuals. I love visual schedules and picture schedules. Looking at these examples on slide 15 of daily schedules for pre-K classrooms, what about these might be helpful for a young English language learner? When I look at these, I notice that they don't just have words, they have pictures. That's one of those key things we talked about, making sure you have pictures along with words to help kids who might not know all those words. And as I think about how these could be even more helpful to English language learners, depending on how many languages are represented in your classroom, you know, typically around here, if you have another language in your classroom, you probably only have one or maybe two other ones, unless you're in the Portland area, and then you could have quite a few different ones. But it could be really helpful if these pictures had the words in the other language underneath or next to the English words, so that the children would be seeing things in their language to compare to the English along with the pictures. Excuse me. Another great thing that's really helpful as far as using your routines to your best benefit with English language learners is using music along with routines. The repetition and rhythm that goes along with singing is going to aid their language learning and bring it along much more quickly than just spoken language. Music is something that all cultures enjoy and celebrate in some way, and so music is something that can really tie together children from all different cultures. And you can read through some of these slides to see some more of the strategies. Like I said, I'm not going to read these all out loud to you, but there's a lot of really great things that you can do. One thing I particularly like, it's on slide 18, is utilizing something simple and routine like show and tell to really empower English language learners, because that's really their chance to kind of show off their culture and to feel like they get to teach their peers something instead of their peers kind of constantly teaching them English. It's their chance to really shine and stand out and to build their self-esteem. And you know, really watch those kiddos when they play in your classroom. What do they gravitate to? Those are the things that you can build on for future language opportunities. I loved this article I found about how to use the project approach to support English language learning. This was really fascinating because we've been doing so much with the project approach in this course. It was neat, for example, the way this classroom, when the kids were really interested in restaurants and they wanted to do a project theme around restaurants, they had a number of Spanish-speaking English language learners from Mexico in their classroom, and they decided to create a Mexican restaurant for their restaurant project, and that allowed everyone to really participate. When they made their word web on the classroom wall, they used pictures with the words, so they made a picture and word web. So just some neat ideas of how you could convert this really interesting project approach to work for English language learners, children with various communication delays as well. The nice thing about the project approach is that all the kids are learning something new, learning new vocabulary, asking investigative questions. So it really helps the ELLs to feel like they're part of the same thing that the other kids are doing, because it's not just them asking about new words, it's everybody learning these cool new vocabulary words, and that can be really motivating. And the last thing I really wanted to say is that, and I sort of mentioned this a few times throughout, but regarding universal design for learning, many and perhaps all of the strategies that I've talked about and that I read about for this presentation are helpful to all students. You know, they're really helpful to English language learners, but as you look at them and think about them, you see how they are supportive of language learning for all children. You know, a lot of these strategies are similar to strategies that you hear about for children from lower income households who struggle with literacy, or children who have speech and language delays with oral and spoken language, and also have some delays therefore in their literacy learning. So as I said on this slide, best practices for English language learners are often also developmentally appropriate practices for all young children in your classroom. And the last 3 slides are resources that are really interesting to look at. There's a lot out there about this, and it's, as I said, it's going to become a more and more prevalent issue as we become a more diverse nation, a more diverse state. It's unlikely that you will go through your whole career without having English language learners in your programs or visiting their homes if you're doing, you know, home visiting or Part C type work. And so starting to learn now how to relate to those families and those students is only going to be to all of our benefit. And I would like to say, you know, a lot of these resources are articles, blogs. Our textbook, the Vukolich text, actually has some really great things, those little gray boxes in every chapter about how to modify all of these literacy strategies for children who are English language learners. I think a really important thing is to not forget the community-based resources around you. If you have, you know, any kind of significant population from a certain culture, it's likely that there are some community-based resources like churches or cultural centers that are going to be a really great resource for you in learning about that culture and understanding how to best teach that culture. Often the way that we teach children who are native English speakers is not necessarily going to be as effective as another teaching strategy for an English language learner, because there's so much of our culture and our thoughts and beliefs and expectations of young children that plays into how we teach them. So, you know, look into language schools and look into translators in your area. Find out what you can, and you showing that care and interest in the families that you're working with is going to go a long way towards building a trusting and respectful relationship that supports language learning for young children from other cultures and languages. And if you guys have questions or comments, please feel free to email me. I love this stuff, and I could talk and talk and talk about it, but I'm sure I have talked enough. So thank you for listening, and I hope that you enjoyed and learned at least one thing that you didn't know before that is really a practical thing that can change how you work with children or even adults in your life who maybe are learning English as a second language. Thank you.